Hi, friends. It's Miss Julie from the Byron Township branch of Kent District Library, and I'm here with my friend.
Hi, I'm Miss Lee. I'm from the Comstock Park branch of Kent District Library, and we have got some really great books to talk to you guys about, all about historical fiction. But what is historical fiction, Miss Julie?
Well, historical fiction is just a story that either tells about an historical day or it includes an historical event in the story. So we've got some great ones to share with you today. Am I going to start us off?
Yeah, would you share what you've got for us?
Yeah, absolutely. The first story I have today is called Born to Ride by Larissa Thule. Born to Ride is a story that is set in 1896. That's right, 125 years ago. Back in 1896, women and girls were told that there were a lot of things that they couldn't do, like wear pants or vote or even ride a bike. In fact, back then, doctors believed women weren't strong enough to balance on a bicycle. And they thought that even if they could, that they would grimace their mouths and lock their jaws and bulge their eyes, and that their face would freeze that way, maybe even forever. They seriously called it bike face. It's a true thing. Now, this isn't a real story, but those are real things that happened way back 125 years ago. And because back then women were often told that there were a lot of things that they couldn't or shouldn't do, it took some brave women and girls to actually say, I can do that too. And this is one of those stories. It's just a fun picture book talking about how girls can do things. A lot of the girls can do all the things that boys can do too.
Wow, bike face. That sounds really silly, but it probably would have scared me to stay off of a
Right?
bike.
I mean, now we know it's nonsense, but back then, even doctors thought it was true.
Oh, and you know what? It's really interesting. It's National Women's History Month, and your book fits perfect for that. And the next one that I've got actually works really well for that as well. This is a book all about Beyonce called Shine Your Light. If you've not heard of Beyonce, she is a really great singer. She started off in a pop group, I believe in the early 2000s, and it was called Destiny's Child. And now she just sings songs I'm sure you've heard, or if you haven't heard of her, your parents have. And she's all about fighting for people and for justice for women, but also for Black women. So this book was good for Black History Month, but also for Women's History Month this month. And look at how fun that cover is. I love it. This talks about how when Beyonce was a child, she was really quiet, but her teacher saw potential in her that when she was on stage and when she was singing, she was confident and fierce. And just that was when she was true to herself. And so it talks about her teacher and how her parents helped her. She had a group of friends who started singing with her. We can see right here that her friends were with her. And when they failed or went to competitions and didn't win, they didn't stop. They kept going until she reached her goal and she reached her dreams. And it's a really inspiring, fun, and beautifully drawn story all about Beyonce and following your dreams. So that one I think fits really well as well.
I mean, who doesn't love Beyonce? Come on.
Right?
I'll have to check that one out, Miss Lee. Well, I have another story today. And this one I kind of cheated a little because it's not historical fiction. It's actually historical. This is a J nonfiction story called The Very Oldest Pear Tree. Now, when I first picked it up, I thought, okay, I like pears, but really a book about a tree? This was really interesting to me, though, because this is the true story of a pear tree that was brought to the United States before it was the United States, back in 1630. That's right, almost 400 years ago. This book was brought from England, or this tree was brought from England and given to a man named John Endicott, who was the governor of what would become Massachusetts. Well, eventually he planted it in his garden, and this tree has seen 400 years of our nation's history. It has survived fires and hurricanes and the Revolutionary War, and pears off of this tree have been eaten by presidents. Well, this tree, cuttings of this tree have been taken, and as the world progressed, cuttings were taken and pieces of this tree have been grown into new trees all over the country. And the endicott pear trees, pears can be eaten. Uh, and you know what? It's still standing. More than 400 years later, this tree is still alive and witnessing what's next in our nation's history. And in fact, if you ever visit, I've got a picture in the book to show you. If you ever visit Endicott, or if you ever visit Danvers, Massachusetts, there's a picture of the author with the actual Endicott pear tree. So this is kind of a fun story because even though I kind of cheated because it's not fiction, it tells a lot of our nation's history through the eyes of this tree.
That is really awesome. So you can go and visit the oldest pear tree and actually eat one of its pears potentially.
I don't know if they, well, maybe, I don't know. I don't know if they actually sell the pears there, but you can actually see the tree. There's a picture of the author in the back visiting the tree for herself.
That is really cool to see a tree that's as old as our country or older, really.
Yeah, older.
All right. Well, I've got some a little bit older books. This one's called The Magic Tree House. This one is like takes place thousands of years ago, but it actually starts with two kids today. So if you've never read any of the Magic Tree House books, there are a lot of them. This is one of the newest ones, and it's about two kids, a brother and sister named Jack and Annie, and they have a magic tree house in their backyard. And they have a librarian who gives them missions. So she'll put a book in there for them. And when they point to a picture, it will take them to that place and that time. And in this one, the librarian gave them a mission to go to visit a Roman legion on the Danube River. So this happened thousands of years ago. And they had to find, the mission was they had to find a secret hero and bring back some of his wisdom for the librarian. But she also tasked them with writing down everything they saw and felt in this camp. So it's just a big camp of all these Roman soldiers, and they get to see them training and see all the weapons. And they actually put the armor on, and it was so heavy that Annie couldn't move. It was really fun, but they have to be careful that they don't get themselves in too much trouble because they don't know that the Roman armor people, the Roman army, don't know that they're from the future. So it's a really fun read. Tells you about the army in Rome and what kind of things that they went through. So this one is really cool. It's a quick read. 6, 7-year-olds, I think, could read this one. It's super fun. And then the other one that I have, it's kind of similar. This one is called Time Jumpers. This one's written by Wendy Moss, and it's called Stealing the World. This is also a series of books. And in this one follows Ava and Chase, and they find a suitcase that will take them back to a different point in history. And in this one, it actually takes them back to King Arthur's castle, and they have to try to save King Arthur. So King Arthur, he's technically, we don't know that he was actually real, but there are a lot of stories wrapped around King Arthur and Merlin the Wizard. Maybe you've heard of them. And because those go through history so much and they're so popular, and a lot of things that we read or watch today are based off of these stories, it's kind of historical fiction in that way. So they find Merlin and he helps them save King Arthur. This one's a little bit more action-packed because there's a little bit more danger, but this one is really fun to read.
That does sound exciting. I'll have to check that one out. Well, the next story I have is actually a J fiction book. Let me get in the screen there. It's a J fiction book called The Nerdiest Girl in the World by Melissa Wiley. Now, this is fiction and it's set around 1910, but it's inspired. And in the back of the book, you can read all about the inspiration of the story. It's inspired by a real town and a real movie company and even a real girl who was a stunt girl in these early Western movies. Well, Pearl was a girl who lived on a ranch with cattle and sheep and even ostriches. And she spent her day collecting ostrich eggs and helping do chores around the ranch while her older brothers, rode horses and tended the sheep and the cattle. Well, one day after one of her brothers was, well, probably all her brothers were riding in a rodeo, a movie director approached her brother Bill and said, "Could you ride that horse and do those stunts in a movie?" So began the Donnelly boys' career as as stuntmen in the Western movies of the time. Now, pretty soon, Pearl and her dad, and frankly, the whole town came out to watch these movies being filmed. I mean, how exciting would that be? If a movie was being filmed locally, I imagine a lot of people would come out. Well, they were there one day and there was an incident and an accidental gunfire. And so the horse Pearl was riding took off in a leap. And the horse's name was Dinah. And so Pearl was doing her best to hang on to Dinah while Dinah was taking off across the field. Pearl was struggling to stay on and slow her down and calm her down. And little did she know, the cameraman kept rolling the whole time. So then the director came up to Pearl and her stunt girl days had begun. This is a really exciting story. You can relate a lot, I'm sure, to the fact that Pearl's mother isn't too sure about her doing these stunts. A lot of fun to watch. A lot of history involved. When you can read the author's note at the back that tells you about the real town and the real movie company and the real girl who was actually a stunt person in the movies way back then. The Nerdiest Girl in the World is actually um, in branches near you right now.
That sounds amazing. I'm going to have to go check that one out. All right, I've got another one. So this one takes place about 200, a little 100 years ago. This one's called Show Me a Sign, and it's written by Anne Claire Lizotte. So this story follows a little girl who is deaf, and she lives on an island called Martha's Vineyard that's right off of Boston. And she is actually the great great granddaughter of one of the original settlers who came to settle on this island alongside the Wampanoag tribe. And it follows her family and how some of the other residents don't treat the Wampanoag Indians very nicely at all. And so this follows like why so many people on this island were deaf. So they have a scientist come on, and he really did. They really did have a scientist come and try to figure out why so many residents on this island were deaf. And he started treating them the same way that they were treating the Wampanoag. He was not very nice. He treated them like were deaf. They weren't as good as him, and it wasn't nice at all. He ends up kidnapping Mary and using her as a live specimen to figure out why she was deaf. He was trying to figure out if it was in the water or if it was in the soil. So a lot of scary but interesting facts in this book. And kind of like Miss Julie's book, at the end of this book, she gives you a lot of information about like why they were deaf. They found out it was hereditary. It wasn't anything on the island. And they talk about the sign language that they used because they used what they called Martha's Vineyard sign language, which was something before we even had American Sign Language. People who were deaf and hearing didn't know how to communicate in the mainland before they came over and helped. And so it talks about the Wampanoag Indians. It's really interesting. It has a lot of interesting facts and all about treating people who are different kindly, because different doesn't mean that we're better than them or that they're better than us. It's different, right? And the last book that I have, this is one of my favorite books that I've read. It's by Alan Gratz. He writes a lot of really good books. A lot of them are historical fiction about what's happening in our time or something a little bit sooner. So this one follows two kids. One is Brandon, and he is in America. He's in New York. This is 9/11. September 11. I'm sure around this time you've heard your parents talk about it. We talk, it's like a national day of remembrance for all the people that died when the two towers fell back in 2001. So that Brandon is in the two towers when the plane crashes, and he's trying to get out as fast as he can so that he can survive. And the second girl that it follows is Rashmina, and she lives in Afghanistan. And it talks about her perspective as a Middle Eastern, and it shows that she was actually being hurt by the Taliban as well, but like why the Taliban was angry and why she was hurt by Americans and why, you know, the Taliban came to America and attacked. So it gives you multiple perspectives about a really, really terrible event. But the book is so good and so interesting. I cried at one point. I was just bawling, but it gives you a lot of information about like myths were going around about why the two towers fell. It shows you where the planes hit and just like really interesting things that I didn't even know happened. And I lived through this. I remember being in 8th grade and I was sitting in my math class and we were watching the TV and I was like, what is this? I remember it very clearly. How about you, Miss Julie? Do you remember where you were?
I do. I was at home. I had been a teacher, and it was my first year not teaching. I was at home with a 3-week-old baby. My daughter was just a little tiny one, and so yeah, I remember watching the TV with my husband and living through all the events of the day and the ensuing weeks. It was incredible, interestingly, the next story I have is actually a 9/11 story as well. You'll see I'm holding up my tablet. The next story I have is called The Ambassador of Nowhere, Texas, written by Kimberly Willis Holt. And this book is just now arriving in the branches, but I wanted to read it. So I found it was available on Libby. Libby's an app where you can download ebooks and audiobooks. And that's where I first read The Ambassador of Nowhere, Texas. I printed out a picture so I could hold this up instead. It's a little bigger. Well, The Ambassador of Nowhere, Texas centers around a girl named Riley who lives in the small town of Antler, Texas. Now, in Antler, Texas, Riley and her best friend Twig do things like 9-pin bowling, and they spend Saturday nights listening to live music at Opalina's Opry House. And the whole town gathers to get snow cones at Riley's parents' snow cone stand. They're teachers, but in the summertime, they run a snow cone stand. Doesn't that sound like fun? I think that sounds like a blast. Well, Riley and Twig are inseparable until Twig goes on a trip to Europe with her aunt. And while she's gone, the absolute unthinkable happens. Planes fly into the Twin Towers in New York City, into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and into a field in Texas, or in Pennsylvania. I'm seeing the word Texas, in Pennsylvania. The entire world would never be the same, especially our nation. And when Twig finally comes back from her vacation, the friendship between Twig and Riley is fractured, leaving Riley feeling completely alone and isolated. But then Joe and his mom move in next door, and the two of them strike up a new friendship. There's another 9/11 tie-in here that really is relatable, that we can understand how others are affected differently by the same events, which I think we can all, with COVID going on, I think we can all understand how everyone's affected a little differently by what's going on today. Well, Riley and Joe set off on an adventure to discover the mystery of Zachary Beaver. And I don't want to give too much about the story away, so I'm just going to say that they research a man named Zachary Beaver and to try to see what they can find out about him. This is such a great story of family and friendship and about that personal connection we all can feel with 9/11 happening around us. The other thing about this story, which I didn't even realize until I finished, was that it's actually a follow-up to a story called Zachary Beaver Came to Town, which was the National Book Club winner almost 20 years ago. And if you like The Ambassador of Nowhere, Texas, you can follow it up with Zachary Beaver. The Ambassador of Nowhere, Texas is brand new in branches right now. Miss Lee, you want to tell them how they can get a hold of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you stop at your closest branch, you can either pick it up off the shelf, or if it's not there, ask the librarian because I bet they will love to help you find that book. Or if you have your library card or your parents let you use theirs, you can just go onto our website and request it there. We also have ebooks like Miss Julie was reading off of. You can check them off that way. I believe all of these are available on there. I know I read a couple of mine on there too.
Yeah.
So we would love to have you come check out these books. They're great reads. We've given you so many options, and they're all fun.
And come tell your youth librarians hello. We miss seeing all the kids at the schools and in story time. So come visit us and say hi.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us. I'm so happy you could be here and we could share these books with you.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Bye.